So everybody, hi, welcome. It's Sunday evening for some of us, and we're doing our Bold Strokes Bookathon, and you have joined the Danger to Desire panel, which is, I think, an excellent title to a book, and I think someone should totally steal that, and I recommend it's Cari Hunter. No, Carsen, we're going right past you.
Sounds like a movie starring Tori Spelling.
Hey, I mean, she's got some time, so we'll see. She's got the availability. Someone just to write the script. So what we're doing today is talking with authors who write intrigue and suspense and all the exciting things that keep you, turning that page. And then we have a cat friend for Cari back there, just waved her little baby in the background. So we're going to talk about kind of all the things that make those books wonderful and how they manage to still suck us into a little bit of romance. So how does that danger become desire, and how do you make that happen, and what's your sequence for that, and how do you decide how much danger and how much desire? Is there a recipe? I have a lot of questions because I don't write a lot of danger, okay? I'm not a dangerous person per se. I mean, you've never been alone with me in a room, that's a different story, but here I just write contemporary lesbian romance. I'm your friendly neighborhood ginger. So here we are, we're gonna talk about it. You're gonna tell me some things, I'm gonna learn some stuff. We're gonna learn things together. This cat's gonna come through the screen. It's like 3D. It's gonna be great. We're gonna have a great time. All right, so everyone, I'm just gonna have you go through and introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about you. I'm gonna go across my screen. I'm gonna have you start, Barbara. Kick us off, love.
I am Barbara Ann Wright. I write sci-fi and fantasy. I am also an editor for Bold Strokes Books. And I'm currently pimping The Scout and the Scoundrel, the second in the Sisters of Ceres trilogy.
I love a good pimp. All right, Cari, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Cari. I'm from the UK. It's very late here, so I'm wearing my pajamas. I obviously have two cats that I can't control. I tend to write thrillers and mysteries with a little bit of romance in there, if you're good.
Oh, sometimes I'm good. Sheri, how about you?
Hi, I'm Sheri Whol, and I'm out here in the Pacific Northwest. I write paranormals, but even though I like my ghosts and my vampires and my werewolves and everything else in between, I also like murder, mayhem, and romance. So I throw it all together.
Sicko.
Is there a better trio than murder, mayhem,
I do my
romance?
best. I do my best.
All right, Suzie, you're up. Tell us about you.
I'm Suzie Clarke. I write romantic intrigue. Right now, I've just finished the third book in a series called the Shadow Series, Shadow Dancers. And I am working currently on an historic fiction. And it is set in 1941, right before Pearl Harbor.
Oh, that's good. Sounds great. All right, Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Tizard. I write aviation-themed action-adventure novels, and my third book just came out, and that is a mystery, and it's called Free Fall at Angel Creek.
See, Julie understood the assignment. She brought her book.
She did. I had to turn it.
I just forgot to show it.
Just forgot it.
You better have one, Carsen, because everybody else wants one.
Okay, now we're good.
I have two.
All right.
Oh,
good.
but they're blurred.
But they're blurred.
I mean, are they your books? We don't even know they're blurry. Go ahead.
No, right? This is, oh, okay. Well, is it my turn? I want to say aviation themed adventure. I mean, because that's cool. So I do not write aviation themed adventure novels, but I do write romantic intrigue. A lot of lawyers are in them, because I was one and am maybe still. But I think, I don't know, it's like 30 something maybe books, and I'm happy to be here.
How do you, when it gets that high, do you even care? Who cares, right? That many books. Carsen, the best. All right, so guys, let me talk to you a little bit about what brought you to writing suspense or intrigue or thriller. Talk to me a little bit about why. You probably all need therapy, and tell me what made you write this kind of stuff. Is this something you grew up enjoying? Is this something that you find great interest in? Are you someone that finds great comfort in watching murder mysteries and Dateline? You tell me what's going on. We'll start with you, Cari.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail there with what I liked when I was growing up, because I've always been a big telly fan, and the sort of stuff that I'm telling and filmed, the sort of things that I would watch and read as a kid is the sort of things that I've sort of like started to write, basically. I mean, great, strong kind of women in film, so Terminator, Aliens. You know, I grew up with those movies, and they've always had the sort of like the strong central female character who's just kind of going on, getting on with stuff and being good at her job, and that's the kind of woman that I like to write. I think I started with more of the traditional kind of romantic intrigue, sort of like romantic blend, I think they tend to be called. But now I've kind of moved away from that. I'm more into the thriller and mystery, and I think it's just what I want to read. I enjoy writing what I would read. I used to read a lot of thrillers. I used to read a lot of crime mysteries. And then I got so pissed off with the fact that, you know, the women were either pathetic in the background and there was no queer characters. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write my own. So I think that's how the books like the Dark Peak series came about. I just got fed up with reading pot boiler thrillers and thought, you know what, I'll just write my own and I'll put my own women in there and do my own thing with them. So I've kind of moved away. I know this is a kind of thriller romance, but I think I've kind of stepped away from the romance angle, and if it happens in my books, it happens, but you know, I'm not going to shoehorn it in if it's not going to work. So that's kind of where I am now, but it stemmed out of, you know, of what I've enjoyed as a kid and to now, basically reading, watching and writing.
That's great. That's awesome. What about you, Sheri?
I'm a bit like Cari. I kind of wanted to write my own take on things. I've always loved the thrillers, always liked the mystery, been a lifelong paranormal fan, and I have a very lengthy career in the judicial system. And so to me, it's about exploring the hows and the whys and then throwing in a werewolf or two to thicken the plot. But at the same time, I also love romance. So I'm like, why can't I have it all in one book? And so, yeah, I like to put it all out there.
And we are so grateful that you do. We love it. All right, Julie, tell me do you like airplanes?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think it would be considered an obsession, just a nice collection.
Okay,
but no, I've always enjoyed thrill rides, roller coasters, you know, the faster the better. So, and I've always enjoyed reading lesbian fiction. I have a pretty extensive library from almost everything published by the Naiad Press, and Bebo Brinker, and all the early books that were really important to me, especially when I was in the military, in the Air Force, and I had to be really closeted. Those books were a lifeline to me. So those are the books that I loved reading. And then I really didn't start writing until just a few years ago. And I thought, I've had the opportunity to have some really interesting, unique experiences. And I want to write about those. I want to share those. And I also I feel kind of a duty to explain the history of what it was like to serve as a woman in the military during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I think that's an important part of our history, and I want people to be aware of that story.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Suzie, what about you? Have you always been interested in this kind of thing? Is it something you found later in life?
I have always liked a woman that knows how to use a can opener. You know what I mean? If she knows how to use a can opener, can open a can of whoop ass, then that's the kind of woman I want to know. And so it's kind of always been my thing to write action adventure. I love romance, but I don't like just a straight romance. There's some great ones out there, but it doesn't interest me. So I always, the action part is probably 60% with the romance, about 40. But they have to have a challenge, a major physical challenge of some sort. And usually in my books, they have that physical challenge. They get together and then they solve it, work it out. And to me, that's exciting for me, to have a woman be faced with a challenge and being able to figure it out without having very much to do it with. You know, she's challenged. That's important for me.
Just needs a can opener. That's all she needs. All right, Carsen, what about you?
So I can totally riff off what everybody has said. Like Cari, I'm drawn to strong women in books. I remember reading all the V.I. Wachowski books, all of Sue Grafton's Kinsey Malone series. Mickey Knight, J.M. Redmond's series, and Jean Redmond would punch me, but lightly on the shoulder. But I'm always, the love story part of that book was always intriguing to me, because as much as I love the mystery, seeing the protagonist in a relationship gives you another side to them. It shows you, it's not just the action adventure part or the intrigue part, but it lets you see the person behind it. And so incorporating romance into the intrigue and the mystery, I think gives you a really good package. And I enjoy writing it. I enjoy reading. That's what I enjoy reading as well.
Great. And what about you, Barb? Are you up in space, or what are we doing now?
I might as well be, though. But I'm also going to steal some from everybody else's answers and from Carsen's package. And that I like seeing, I wanted to see more LGBT people in stories. So I was like, every story needs a sarcastic lesbian, so let's just put one in. But then also I'm weird, and I've always been weird, and I like to read about weird things. So if I try to write just romance, then I'm always like, wow, and then a giant spider comes along. So I just was like, well, screw it. I'll write fantasy romance or sci-fi romance with LGBT characters.
I love it. That's awesome. That is fantastic. All right. So obviously you guys have a lot of depth and planning, probably more planning than some of us contemporary romance writers. So how do you plan your story? Do you map it out ahead of time? Do you have an idea of what you want to have the main theme be? Is it, I know that sometimes there's an assassination attempt, or there's a kidnapping, or like, how do you decide what action is going to lead the story? Let's start with Sheri.
Oh, okay. So, no, I don't have it completely mapped out. I mean, I have the shell. I pretty much know the basis of the story. And then it often changes as I go along. Sometimes who turns out to be the bad guy isn't who I thought was going to be at the beginning of the story, and they surprised me. So, but I do have the nuts and bolts there. And I basically know where I'm going, but it does, like I say, it will take turns I wasn't expecting.
Suzie, is it the same thing for you? Are you somebody who plots things out, or?
Yeah, it's a lot like that, exactly. Since I'm working on my 4th book now for Bold Strokes, and because it's a romantic intrigue for me, I find that plotting it out as best I can, but yet still being able to be open to changes, because there are changes, but usually it's the main characters, usually as far as what they do, don't change, but everything else around it usually does. I had originally thought, I'm going to really, this 4th book that I is working on right now, I'm going to plot it out, and it's going to be really, this is the way it's going to be, but it's changed because I want to be open to things that happen when a writer writes, things come to you, they just are in there trying to come out, and I want to be open enough that I'll make a change if I really feel it needs to be done. But yeah, I'm getting more and more to be a plotter. It helps me in my writing, gives me direction when I open that blank screen and I'm stuck. I know if I've plotted it out, I've got a much better chance of working through it, even though it may not be exactly what's on that outline for right now, that it's changed completely. At least I find that I have a better chance of working through it.
Now, I know, Carsen, you do yours in pieces, but do you have a map? Like, do you have a plan of what you're doing? Like, you don't do it in order, which I think is insane, but I know you have a goal, like you have a guideline, a skeleton. What do you got over there?
This plan of which you speak, and these nuts and bolts. No, I mean, I guess I do. I have the blurb.
That's what you have?
Yeah.
You have 105 words.
It's 150 words, Missy. And
don't lose those 45.
I really, 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 really want to be a plotter, because I feel like if I had it sketched out, then I would know where I'm going. But, something Suzie just said really resonated with me. And that is, I don't often know what's going to happen. Part of the joy of writing to me is finding out what's going to happen. I mean, it's just as important to me. And that means it's very messy process. And I will often have to chunk whole bits of it, totally rework it. It's very frustrating, but I just attribute that to that's time spent while I'm writing instead of before. So it's the same difference. It's just my process is kind of messy. But I often will get, like, I'll be working on something. I really believe my brain's working in the background, but it just doesn't like to write it on paper until it's ready to spit it out. So I'll be working on something and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now I know where it's going to go. But if I try and figure that out in advance, I just shut down. So that's just me.
Chaos has worked so far. What about you, Cari?
Usually I have maybe a premise, something like Unbreakable started with just the premise, you know, injured woman kidnaps a doctor. I didn't plot that one at all. It was just like, well, where the hell do I go from there? Why would you do that? You know, why would she do something so drastic? And then I fit all the pieces in. But it don't work like that for all the books. I mean, something like Alias was just like an idea of a woman with amnesia wakes up in a car next to a dead woman. And I really didn't plot that. I just kind of, I was like, well, I like the idea, so I'm just going to write 5,000 words of the opening, and then got to the point where I thought, shit, I better actually figure out what's going on now. So I'd love to like that. I'd love to be a plotter. I'd love to be able to sort of like write it all down and plan and have these sticky notes and, you know, all the threads going. And I can't do that, even though it'd be really good for me because I work shifts and my brain is broken basically. So I think the older I get and the more knackered I get, the more I should write this stuff down. And I do find myself writing a lot of notes, but it's as I'm going along, not before. In fact, I tried to plot a book just before, the one I was writing before Unbreakable, and it kind of broke me, really. It didn't work for me. I over-planned it and it became not fun. So I set it aside. So yeah, I don't get to the point where I know what pulling knickers my characters are wearing and what books they read at night and stuff like that. I don't go into it that deep, and some people do. It just doesn't work for me. But I'll know sort of like, if I'm a mystery writer, I know who's done it, because you kind of need to know who done it so that you can clues through the book. But that doesn't change. I know the beats. I know the beats, the big beats as they're going to go along. I know how it ends. I know the middle bit, you know. The rest of it, nah, I'm
just winging it. Just gonna wing. Julie, Barbara, how are you? Are you guys in the same boat? Tell me everything.
I'm pretty much, I kind of visualize my whole story as a film in my head before I do anything. And what the characters might look like, what they might sound like, you know, the environment. And then once I do that, I do kind of a real broad outline. And there's the formation maneuver, it's called a weave. And so that's how so I just kind of, it's not a normal like an outline, it's a weird little diagram on the back of a flight plan. But then I just have a broad outline to start from. And then sometimes, and the folks that are talking about, oh, when the characters talk to you, I thought, oh, sure, that's some weird thing that writers like to say. And then it happened to me, and I was like, I'm hearing a conversation in my head, and who are these people? And I was like, oh, it's my characters. I better write this down. So then I do notes and as I'm going along, but that's my process.
Barbara, you do a lot of world building, Barbara. You don't have to plan more than Carsen's Post-its upside down on the back of a napkin.
You know what? I try not to, actually, because if I go in depth and build a whole world, I'll want to put it all in the book. And people don't want to read page after page after page about, you know, magma formations and stuff. So really, I make up stuff as I need it. And I tried plotting out a novel once, and I had like a big outline and all that, and I was mad at it. I was like, you don't tell me what to do, you know, and I was like, I couldn't wait to just bust out of that and do something different that went against it. So that wasn't a fun time. So now it's like, I get my characters first. I know them, I know what they do. And then I just kind of throw them into one situation after another and write how they deal with it. And like Carsen said, sometimes I've got to dump a lot and redo it, but I don't actually mind that, since editing is my favorite part of the process.
That is the perfect segue to our next question, Barbara. It's like, you know what you're doing. Ugh. So do you think of the characters first or the conflict first? What is it? What draws you to the book? Like, you know, Cari just randomly finds people next to her dead and when she wakes up from after a shift. So these are important things to know. Like, is it the character that you like? Barbara, let's start with you. Do you know a character or do you know a conflict first?
No, I know a character first, and usually an idea will pop into my head about, you know, there's this person and they want this, you know, and then I'm like, okay, how do I build a fantasy novel around that? And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm like, no, that's a dead idea, throw that one away. But I'll have the character, I'll write a bunch about him, I'll know them inside out, how they react to everything, if they're quick to anger, if they're this, they're that, they're the other. And then I build the plot around that one. And sometimes I build it and I'm like, who could possibly love this person? That won't work in a romance novel. Throw that one away, build another one. And then I sort of just tack the plot around that.
What about you, Carsen? I mean, it varies. You know, it's sometimes so my blurry book, Trial by Fire.
Oh, there we go.
I got it.
So that's the first book in a 3-book series that's all set in the same world, but each book is a standalone. I wanted to draw characters from the first book for the second book and on. So the second book is the first book was more plot based. The second book is more started with the characters because I already had some that I peppered in the first book. And the third book, who knows? But, you know, it just kind of depends. If I have an idea for a plot first, that's where I start. And if I find a person intriguing or a character I've thought of intriguing, I start there and then figure out a plot around them. So just kind of flexible that way.
How about you, Suzie?
Now I'd have to agree with that, with what Carsen said. It just depends. Sometimes, you know, I don't have as many books as a lot of others do, but when I do, I did Shadow Dancers is at the end of a 3-book series. So the characters have carried on for those 3 books and then expanded with other characters. But this new one coming up that's from World War II, or right before Pearl Harbor, I think the characters came to me first. First I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to write about what happens in 1941 here in the United States before Pearl Harbor, what was going on? And so that's kind of how that one started. And then, of course, the characters, I thought about the plot and what kind of characters I would need. But the characters have also come to me too, that, you know, 2 best friends start off and this is what happens to them. So it varies. It really does vary depending on I think usually what happens is I have a plot in mind. I have a kind of a general, wouldn't this be kind of fun to do this kind of thing? And then the character, based on what the situation is, the time where they're at, then the characters start to develop usually. But again, I think it's important that for me, I want to be open to anything that happens. So.
I just want to thank Cari's cat for making this so exciting for us.
I get rid of him. Just he will not stop.
Well, why don't you answer, because you're here next. So why don't you tell us?
I can't remember the question.
Do you
character or conflict?
Do you plan the conflict of the character or the cat? Does the cat plan that?
It varies. Like everybody else has said, sometimes I will get a character first. Dark Peak books were character first, definitely. I had Megan Sanna planned out a little bit, actually, weirdly. They had their own little background before I even started to put the crime to that story. Unbreakable and Alias were big kind of big bang premises, like I've mentioned before. Breathe was basically me going out jogging and thinking of a stupid name. And that's where that stemmed from. It was literally me jogging and I started laughing because I'd thought of this name, Jemima Pardon, the stupid luckless paramedic who was a bit wheezy and asthmatic because I was probably dying myself on the run at that point. And that's where that one came from. So who the hell knows, really, where inspiration will strike. But yeah, there isn't there's no hard and fast rule with where it all comes from, what comes first.
Okay. Hypoxia, that's where her dreams come from.
Basically, yeah.
She's suffocating. All right, Julie, what about you?
I think I'm attracted to kind of powerful, dramatic situations or environments, like getting through Air Force pilot training or being on a plane when there's an in-flight emergency or an airplane crash. And then I think about what kind of women would be involved in that, either as, and usually in a position of leadership as a commander or something, and then the other main character. And then once the thing that I find fascinating is how people respond when they're put in a really difficult situation, like under extreme pressure, and how they're transformed by great challenges. So those are the themes that I'm kind of attracted to.
And what about you, Sheri? Is it led by the werewolf or is it led by the dog bite? You tell me.
Well, it is led by the werewolf, I think. For me, and it can come from anywhere. And speaking of werewolves, like Burgundy Betrayal, I was riding my bike home from work because I like to ride my bike home, and I go through this large state park when I'm coming home, and I'm riding along and I'm looking down and I'm saying, that would be a great place to leave a body. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm in a park. Who would leave a body in a park? And I thought, werewolf. Of course a werewolf would leave a body in the park. Yeah. And by the time I got home, I pretty much had the story in my head, and then the characters evolved from there. And I do that on most of them, including like this one that came from a canine training at a body farm in Colorado.
Very cool. Stories. That's so cool.
Evolved.
So half of you use aerobic exercise to get your activity, to get your stories, and the rest of you just talk to voices in your head. I like it. That's good. That's good. It's a good blend. All right. So obviously you have to have some amount of danger and excitement to make this panel, because you have to be dangerous and have some desire in there too. What ratio of danger to desire do you like to do? Are you 50-50? Are you 60-40? Is there a kiss in your book and that's what counts? Like, you tell me. Let's start with you, Cari.
The latter. I think I've kind of whittled mine down to maybe about 90% 10 in terms of sort of like plot and intrigue, and possibly 10% kissy facing. I mean, that's Unbreakable.
It's a technical term.
Yeah, yeah. That is definitely that is the genre that I am now going for: intrigue / kissy facing. Unbreakable didn't really. It wasn't a romance. It didn't really have a romance in it. It had two strong women who found themselves in horrendous circumstances and end up building this bond out of those circumstances. It wasn't a romance. Did it have a happy ever after? Yeah, it did, because it worked out for them. But I think there's ways of making a thriller a romance without shoehorning a romance that won't fit into it, if you know what I mean. And I've learned that there are, there's other ways to do it if you're not sort of like comfortable sort of like blending the two. So with Unbreakable, I had a third character. I had Safia, a detective, who's in a relationship with Cami, her girlfriend, and the kind of relationship angle was more to do with them than it was Grace and Ellen, who were in the other sort of like half of the story. And it seems to have worked. People enjoyed that. I think they enjoyed the novelty of it a little bit, but they liked the characters, and I think they liked the way that the relationships worked. Which is nice, because within our genre of sort of like WLW fiction, there is this expectation that everything has to be a romance, or at least have that element in it. So to kind of twist it a little way so that I'm happy writing and the readers are happy reading, it was nice actually. It worked for Unbreakable. So maybe I will continue to go along that theme.
Oh, we can be very excited and wait for that. What about you, Barbara? Where are you? How much romance is in your book?
I am also light on the romance, getting like 80-20, 90-10 to the action and adventure. But I usually like to put so much running around and fighting people and climbing trees that there's not much time for kissing, because if they stopped in the middle of everything and we're like, okay, everyone, put your weapons down, time for smoochies, then that really wouldn't work. So I like to, people kind of struggling with their affection for somebody, and they've got to just do it or else. And so I even have a line in Scout and the Scoundrel that's like, she knew they had to hurry up and fall, or she knew they had to hurry up and be in love because they didn't have time to fall. And I was like, so I think that's mine. If I ever did like a slow burn, ponderous romance, I I don't think I could do that. There'd be too many giant spiders just suddenly coming into it for that to happen.
What about you, Julie? You always have something exciting happening. Where do they have time for romance when the plane's going down?
Well, I'm trying to clear the memory of giant spiders, you know, swarming a room in a moment of romance. So I have to, but my goal is to have 50% action adventure and 50% romance. And when I say that, I include the interaction, the glances, the brushing against each other, whatever, in that. I don't know that I really achieved that, but that's my attempt anyway.
Suzie, you said you were about 60-40, is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm leaning, each time I write, I think I lean a little more towards blending it more. So yeah, for right now, it used to be a little less, but right now it's 60-40, and at some point it may even be more. I love the relationship between the women, that romantic relationship that develops or has started and continues on. I love that part about a story, blended with the action and adventure. To me, that really is what meshes that story. But I do find that the more those two come closer together, the romance and the intrigue, the harder it is to write that story, to make sure all the threads are wrapped up and ready and or cohesive to the story. There's nothing sticking out and left out there. So but I do really, really enjoy writing romance, the relationship of the romance. The sex has changed a little bit for me over the last several years writing. It's probably going to be less graphic than it has been in the past. I think it's only because, not that I didn't enjoy writing it, it's just that my stories seem to now have that deeper blend of the romantic part, the relationship part, as opposed to the physical act of that relationship.
All right, sounds great. What about you, Sheri?
Oh, I'm all over the board because it really depends on the story.
Yeah.
And what's going on. I really am I love happy ever after. And so to me, it's got to be right for the characters to make that HEA believable. And so it could be hot and heavy. It could be way more subtle. It just depends on the story and the characters.
You agree with that, Carsen, story-based?
I do. And I often face challenges, sometimes to get the highest stake conflict. My characters are in such disparate places that bringing them together is hard. You know, like there might be an actual legal conflict that keeps them from getting together. Like they're working opposite sides of the case and one of them can't continue to work on this case if they cross those lines. Or, you know, one's a judge on against a defense attorney who's trying a case in their courtroom. And so while those give you a really good conflict base, it's hard to get them in the same room being kissy-faced together and sustain that, because, you know, at some point they're like, we can't be doing this. And you can't write a whole book off one instance of we can't be doing this. And then, you know, so you've got to have that where they're spending time together, and it's okay for them to spend time together. And it's not continually like, we can't be spending time together. So that's always a challenge I face, is trying to balance getting the really good conflict and also getting them together. So it's constantly a challenge, and it ends up all over the spectrum in terms of how they wind up evolving that relationship.
So Sheri actually was opened a perfect segue for us. Are you a happy ever after person or a happy for now kind of writer? This is a different, you know, you're writing suspense, you're writing all these dangerous moments. Are you just trying to get through those moments? I always think of that quote in Speed, that relationships never, you know, come to fruition, that come out of a very tense moment in time or event. Is that how you feel? I mean, I know that Sheri is a happy ever after person. Go Sheri, I'm on board with you. What about you, Barbara? Are you happy for now or are you happy ever after?
I usually do. Well, I call it happily ever after. People who've read it call it happy for now. And I'm just like, they're pessimists, clearly. But because it's like there's all the actiony stuff, they wind up together and people are like, yeah, well, they haven't actually had time to get to know each other, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, yeah, I guess happily for now, because you're right. Unless I write extensive stories with these people, there's never knowing if they can be happy forever. But in my mind, they are, and that's all that counts.
Whatever is in your mind, we agree with. All right, Cari, what about you?
Weirdly, I do write happy ever afters. I love an epilogue. God love the epilogue. I don't know what I'd do without an epilogue, or I could just, kind of throw in a sex scene or give my character some breathing space. But yeah, quite a lot with mine happens in the epilogues. But yeah, I do like a nice happy ever after, even if I don't consider myself a romance writer. I will always strive to get my characters to a place where they're happy and contented, because after all the shit I've put them through, I think they kind of deserve that. So, I've never said this is the way that they're going to be for the rest of their lives, but at the same time, I've never sort of like hinted that is not the way it's going to be. So reader decides, I guess. But yeah, choose
your own adventure. All right, cool. What about you, Suzie?
Well, I love that comment that the reader decides. I love that. Nobody ever starts at the beginning of the story. You always start in the middle of the story. And I think you always end in the middle of the story too. I'd have to say, if I were going to choose one or the other, I'd have to say happily ever after. For me, when I write a book, write a story, and it's ended, I want to go on to something else. I want to make sure those characters, are you okay? Did you have a good time? Did you people did okay, right? You're all right? So I'd have to say, yeah, happily ever after, simply because I like things wrapped up. But I agree, happily ever after for this moment in their time, and the reader can decide if they're going to go on forever, or maybe later on they're going to have a problem and break up, who knows. But yeah, I think that the fact that a writer starts in the middle of the story, or at some point the story's already out there somewhere, just ask them to give you their backstory, and you'll find out just how much story the reader didn't hear on those characters.
Now, Carsen, you've written quite a few series. Do you go for the happy ever after route? Are you happy for now because we revisit them later? Like, how does that work?
Well, it's funny because I was just thinking while everyone was talking about, I love a good wedding, I love a good wedding. And so I rarely have like a wedding in a book that's just a one-off, but I have had fun writing some weddings in series, where you get to revisit the characters in the first book toward the end of the series. So you get to see them come together over the arc of that. And it is difficult to write an epilogue when you're writing series too, because you really need to wait to the end, because otherwise it just doesn't work. But I go either way. I mean, I'm kind of like Barbara. My happily for now means happily for ever after in my head, but I don't often show 10 years later or even a year later, because in my head that's already happened. I like to end on a kind of an action note. So I don't wrap it up all neatly often. But in my head, it's always happily ever after.
Julie, do they survive the plane crash? Do they make it?
Yes. I write happily ever after, number one, because I need to write that. I need to write the happy ending stories. And I think people need to read that, especially, recent years. It's like we need hope to hang on to. So I definitely do that. But I'm outlining my first series. And so I'm kind of, I'm looking at a 3-book science fiction trilogy in addition to another one. But I'm thinking that might have to be a happily for now, and then to go on for the rest of the books in the series. But I have to have a happily ever after.
And Sheri, anything more to add? I mean, you started this conversation, so I'm grateful.
No, I'm all good with the happy ever after. Sorry, that it's important to me. I'm like what Julie said. It's for me. I got to have that, and I want that hope as well.
Good. All right, so one really big question I have, do you start with the action? Do you hit us in the face with a dead person next to you in a car? Or do you start with a story? And how do you determine what is it? Do we open with this flash scene, and what makes you decide that? Is it just on a whim? Is it because you know what you're going to be writing about? Or do you just to take it by surprise every book? Let's start with Sheri.
I tend to start with whamming you right in the face. Or as my friend Vicky told me when she picked up All That Remains, she goes, not only did you hit us with that, but you hit us with your potty mouth right on line 1. So, yeah.
Swearing in depth right away.
Got it. I got it all covered. But yeah, I like to hit it hard right at the beginning.
Great. Yeah. All right. Julie, what about you?
Oh yeah, I have, I was just thinking, yes, I think I have a lot of swear words in mind also. But I think my first book, there was a plane crash, and then another one, there was a landing a plane in a fog, and that was in the simulator. So yeah, I have something big and dramatic right at the beginning.
Suzie, action first, or you get some story in there?
Oh wow, I think I build it a little bit before I whap them with the action. I like to establish the characters. I like to get the people involved with it before either kill somebody off or they have this horrible event that's going to happen to them. So they're invested. I'm looking back at how all the books started, and it's usually a little build. There's a catch somewhere to keep them reading, but it's usually building the characters.
Cari, you're all over the map there, or are you always knocking us out with somebody dead?
No, I'm just trying to think of how I've started all mine. I tend to start with a bit of a wham, I think. Sometimes a flashback, sometimes very cold sort of open. I think I'm probably influenced by TV, where they have the teaser before the advert break, especially with the Dark Peak series, because I think those started with the crime. So they didn't even involve the main characters. So Meg and Sam weren't even in the prologue sort of thing. In fact, I think I have actually started with a few prologues, which I don't know whether they're the done thing, but they kind of work for crime stories, because then you can find out, you can go back and unpick, and it'll make sense later sort of thing. So yeah, No Good Reason and certainly A Quiet Death started with that. Snowbound started with a flashback to Sam, no, flash forward to Sam getting shot. And then you kind of unpick how that came to be. So yeah, I will start with a bit of a space, I think. And then pick up everything else after that kind of shock opening, grab them by the throat kind of tactic.
That's the way I like to start all my days. All right, Carsen, what about you?
It varies. I mean, it varies. I do love to open with a bang when I can. I just turned in a book last month, and I really struggled with that because I intended to open with this big kind of perilous action scene, and it just wasn't working. And I figured out why. It was because I really, really needed to introduce those characters, one of the characters first, so you would feel the investment in the scene. So, what I wanted to do, the big bang, wasn't working because I needed you to care about the big bang, and you weren't going to if you weren't invested in the character first. So I had to switch it around. It took me forever to figure out why it wasn't working, but most of the time it's fun to just kind of jump right in. So
awesome. And what about you, Barbara? Is it giant spiders and killer night smoothies right away, or what? What's the deal?
Well, I don't usually have the main villain or the main trouble right away, and I've never actually had one character hit another character in the face with a dead body. But I do like to put them in the middle of the peril, whether it's life or death peril or just something at the moment. I do like to drop one character in it and have a really deep POV in their head, so you know what they're feeling, you know what they're thinking, and then hopefully by the end of that scene you're already rooting for them to make it.
Great, good. I was hoping you were going to say a giant spider right away, but
I actually, thinking about it, I was trying to think, have I ever written a giant spider? And I was like, I did have one in the background in Not Your Average Love Spell, but it's there and it's gone quickly. We don't revisit it. But now I might have to make, Night of the Giant Spider smoothies or whatever the heck we were talking about in the chat roll.
All right, I love it. All right, so we have time for just one more quick question. I just want to know what you're working on now and what can we look forward to? Let's start with you, Julie.
Oh, I am working on series outline for my first book, The Road to Wings. It'll be a series of women in the military.
Fantastic. Suzie, what about you?
I am working on it. It's called Enigma. It's the 1941, right before, just days before Pearl Harbor. An agent is sent to a small town in Ohio, and has to find out at the airplane factory there, somebody's attempting to steal information, and she goes there to try to find out who it is. And it's of her and what happens to her and the people in that town.
Awesome. All right, Barbara, what's going on with you?
I'm working on the last book after this one in the Sisters of Ceres trilogy. It is called The Mage and the Monster.
Those are the best book covers, by the way. I love those.
Oh, thanks.
They're so cool. All right, Cari, what's going on in your world?
I'm working on the story that I set aside because I had the Unbreakable itch that I needed to scratch. So I've gone back to that. Hopefully it'll be the start of a sort of thriller, police procedural series with a bit of luck. And it stars Jo Chaw, who had a cameo in Unbreakable because I'd already started writing her. So I thought, what the hell, I'll give her a little bit of a role in Unbreakable. So she'd already been introduced, for God's sake.
And then there's a cat in that story too. What about you, Sheri? Yes. What's next?
I'm working on a book called The Artist, and it has to do with an artist who has had a traumatic brain injury and now can paint the faces of people who are being murdered.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that sounds awesome and terrifying, and something I want to read but probably won't because I value my sleep. All right, Carsen, what about you? Tell me what's going on now. You finished new series?
So this book comes out in February. It's called Perilous Obsession. It was inspired by the HBO miniseries about Michelle Oswald, Patton Oswalt's wife, who wrote, who was a crime blogger and worked on cold cases. And so that's what inspired that book. I am working on a follow-up book to her Consigliere, which is a mob book. And the bodyguard in that book will be the main character in the next book. And it's called Made for Her.
Oh, I love it. Sounds great. Thank you for everything. Thank you for your messages and being here. Get your books. Hold your books if you got them. Everybody check them out.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you for storyboarding with us on the side. And I hope we find a killer smoothie in someone's book very soon. Okay.
Fighters for the win.
Fighters smoothies. It was great seeing you guys. Thanks so much.